Hey, welcome back to Business 101, Introduction to Business. This is now our 8th lecture in our series on management. And in this particular video, we're looking at the topic of managerial planning. Planning, as you may remember, is one of the 4 big functions, the primary functions that management deals with on behalf of the organization. And so we're going to look at sort of a survey or an overview of some of the primary and secondary functions of planning and what it means to be a manager who needs to plan. So you can see here, in the everyday general sense, there is a hierarchy of plans that we understand in business. At the highest level, there is a strategic plan, and that, as you see described, a plan reflecting decisions about how to allocate resources, how to set priorities and steps, the practical plan needed to meet strategic goals. Now, typically we break apart the strategic plan down into smaller bite-sized chunks or tactical plans, short-term plans concerned with implementing specific aspects of a company's strategic plans. And finally, even tactical plans get broken down into daily or weekly or monthly performance plans, right, for individual frontline departments and divisions and work teams. That's known as the operational plan. Now, what may be helpful is to see these drawn out in a diagram so we can see it graphically. And this is, of course, figure 5.5 from your textbook, which demonstrates what we've just talked about, right? That at the highest level, senior management is concerned with strategic plans. Mid-management is then typically responsible for executing from a tactical level, and then frontline managers will be dealing with daily or weekly operational plans, or perhaps monthly operational plans and the actual execution thereof. So this is what daily life for a manager typically looks like, is minding the store, so to speak, in how well are you executing on your level of appropriate plans on a day-to-day, month-to-month, year-to-year basis. However, sometimes things come up, and that's why we have this slide to talk about other types of plans, contingency planning and crisis management. Contingency planning, sort of planning for the unplannable, or at least having a plan B in your hip pocket. Identifying aspects of a business or its environment that might entail changes in strategy. You're not really sure, it hasn't happened yet, but with some degree of uncertainty, sometimes it pays to have a plan B in your hip pocket. Many of us know exactly what that's like, and so you hope for the best and plan for the worst, as sometimes it's called. That's what it's part of the spirit of having a set of contingency plans in the ready, so that if things don't go quite the way that you hope they will, might you have a plan B so that the business can still tackle the environment if you have to entail some changes in your strategy. Now, at the most extreme level, of course, you have crisis management. You can see the definition, the organization's methods for dealing with emergencies. Now, all of us are pretty much well aware that nobody was planning at the end of 2019 for a novel coronavirus to be unleashed on the entire world and to change the way that we do business for weeks and months at a time. Shelter-in-place orders, quarantine, self-shelter-in-place, all sorts of these kinds of things, whole business industries being locked down for weeks at a time, and we are still emerging from that. And that's what we're talking about when we talk about crisis management. When we're dealing with a large-scale emergency, it is still management's role to develop quickly and execute a crisis management plan. And those are difficult to do because you're dealing with such a high degree of uncertainty and risk that sometimes to know what is the absolute non-negotiable, what do you need to protect, what may you think about possibly in a worst case scenario cutting loose, but how do you execute these things in a way to protect the most of the organization's assets, as well as in some cases people's lives, and still move forward with organizational goals, plans, and strategy. This can be challenging, this can be tricky, this can be really, really difficult, depending on the nature of the emergency or the contingency that you are looking at. Another aspect of planning that sometimes isn't directly talked about is, as you see on this slide, management and the corporate culture. Now, what's corporate culture? You see here the definition. Corporate culture, the shared experiences, stories, beliefs, and norms that characterize an organization. In the best case, it can help define the work and the business climate that exists as an organization. What is corporate culture? Corporate culture is what the place feels like when you start working there. It's the aggregate culture of how do people relate to each other? What are the stories you tell? What kinds of jokes and humor are acceptable, which are not? How do people treat each other? And how does that help people feel and perform? Are they excited to be there? Are they engaged? Or are they actively disengaged? Do they really find work making them miserable as human beings? This is important stuff, and it's something that it's no mistake, this slide occurs in a lecture deck on planning. It is something that managers need to take seriously and plan. It's not something that just happens. If you let it just happen, it means that you're not minding the store. Part of management's job is to decide what kind of a corporate culture do we want here, and how do we make sure that that culture gets built here. And so you see here, this next slide, right, that it is about communicating the culture and managing change. You see the bullet points here. Managers themselves must have a clear understanding of the corporate culture that's intended, and they must transmit this culture to others in the organization. Wait a minute. How do you transmit culture? You transmit culture by setting the example of what is acceptable and tolerated and what is not acceptable and what is not tolerated. You always carry your weather with you. And so, as a leader, as an example, people are looking to you to set the example. That's how you transmit the culture to others in the organization. And managers should maintain the culture by rewarding and promoting those who understand it and work toward maintaining it. I kid you not, energy, personal energy, and personal values are communicable. They can be transferred from person to person when others see the example of leaders and managers. So we have here sort of 3 steps suggested for managing change. At the highest level, analysis of the company's environment highlights extensive change as the most effective response to its problems. If that's the case, top management begins to formulate a vision of a new company. What does the new version, the best version of our organization look like for the future, given what is going on in the environment? And then the firm has to set up new systems for appraising, for compensating employees, especially those who enforce the firm's new values. This is important stuff. This is really where management earns its money, because we are beginning to realize finally in business that corporate culture is probably the most important tool we have to advance the performance of our organizations. Everybody has technology. Everybody has systems. Everybody has software and computers. Everybody leverages the cloud and databases and big data. That's not where the difference is going to come. Where the difference is going to come is from our people, and therefore corporate culture needs to be deliberately and intentionally planned and then implemented in such a way as to get the very most from our people. And how do you do that? By instilling great corporate culture. This is done intentionally. This is done deliberately. This is planned. And therefore, in this overview of planning, from normal everyday planning, operational stuff, to the step above, to tactical planning, to the big picture strategic planning, to dealing with the unanticipated emergencies, crisis, contingency, to deliberately planning the culture you want to see. All of this is part of the role and responsibility of great management. It's a lot to chew on, isn't it? More of this in the textbook, and we'll see you in the next lecture.